I have always been fascinated by understanding why we feel so vulnerable in our closest relationships. For a long time, I observed children, their expressions, their gestures, and I realized that every reaction carried an inner world of feelings, fears, and expectations. That's when I discovered Mary Ainsworth and her strange situation methodology, an experiment that seems simple on the surface but reveals so much about the complexity of human connections. Today, I want to share with you not only what Ainsworth studied but also how these discoveries resonate in our adult lives, especially when we talk about attachment anxiety. The Strange Situation was created in the 1970s as a way to observe, in a structured way, how young children responded to separation and reunion with their caregivers. The logic is fascinating. In a safe but slightly stressful environment, children display behavior patterns that reflect their attachment style. What intrigues me the most is noticing that these seemingly simple reactions, crying, seeking closeness, reaching for comfort or avoidance, carry profound messages about how safe, loved, or insecure we feel. When I think specifically about anxious attachment, I feel that it begins here, in the early interactions with caregivers. Children with an anxious ambivalent attachment show very specific behaviors during the strange situation. They may become extremely distressed when the caregiver leaves, crying intensely and trying in every way to get attention. Even when the caregiver returns, these children may show ambivalence. They want closeness, but at the same time, they may display anger or frustration. It's as if they are saying, "I need you, but I fear I cannot truly rely on you." As I reflect on this, I realize there is something universal in this experience. Many of us carry this sense of uncertainty in our relationships, even in subtler ways. Sometimes, we feel anxiety when someone we love doesn't respond immediately to a message, or when we notice signs of emotional distance. This pattern has deep roots in childhood, and the Strange Situation helps us see these origins clearly. What fascinates me about Ainsworth's work is the sensitivity with which she observed every gesture. It wasn't just about classifying children. It was about understanding the emotional complexity of each individual. When we watch an anxious child in the Strange Situation, we understand that their behavior is not problematic or wrong. It is a reflection of their inner world and the caregiving experiences they had. This perspective invites us, as adults, to look at our own anxieties with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment. In the next few minutes, I want to dive even deeper into how these manifestations of anxious attachment appear in the Strange Situation, and from there, reflect on how they echo in our adult relationships. I invite you to join me on this journey, looking not only at what science teaches us but also at how we can understand and transform our own relational anxiety. As I continued to study the Strange Situation, I became increasingly aware of the subtle but powerful ways in which attachment anxiety reveals itself. It's not just about crying or clinging. It's about the underlying fear, the anticipation of rejection, and the constant need to test whether the caregiver is truly reliable. Watching an anxious child in this structured setting is like peering into the raw map of human vulnerability. When the caregiver leaves the room, these children often experience a sudden surge of distress that seems almost unbearable. Some may cry loudly, rocking back and forth, their tiny bodies trembling with tension. Others may call out repeatedly, unable to settle until they receive reassurance. I remember reading case after case and feeling a mix of empathy and recognition, because I realized that many of us carry echoes of this early anxiety into our adult lives. The fear of being abandoned or overlooked doesn't vanish. It transforms and follows us into romantic relationships, friendships, and even professional connections. What fascinates me most is the ambivalence that anxious children display when the caregiver returns. They rush forward, seeking comfort, yet simultaneously push away or express frustration. It's as if they are trapped between two conflicting emotions, an urgent need for closeness and a lingering mistrust that the caregiver will respond consistently. Watching this unfold, I can't help but think about how often we do the same in adulthood, texting someone repeatedly, craving reassurance, then feeling hurt when the response isn't immediate or what we hoped for. Ainsworth's observations were meticulous. She didn't just note the obvious behaviors. She analyzed the timing, the intensity, and the subtleties of each child's reactions. It's this depth of attention that allows us to truly understand anxious attachment, not as a flaw, but as a learned pattern born from inconsistent caregiving. The child is not wrong for reacting this way. They are adapting to an environment that sometimes provides comfort and sometimes unpredictably withdraws it. Reflecting on this as an adult, I realize that these patterns can be transformative if we approach them with awareness. Recognizing our own anxious tendencies is the first step toward understanding the roots of our fears. By observing them in the context of the strange situation, we can begin to separate past experiences from present realities, learning to respond to others and ourselves with greater compassion. In the next segment, I want to explore how these early anxious patterns echo in adult relationships, influencing the ways we seek love, reassurance, and connection. I'll share insights into recognizing these behaviors in ourselves and practical reflections on how to navigate the tension between need and fear, closeness and mistrust. As I reflect on the anxious behaviors observed in the strange situation, I can't help but notice how clearly these patterns carry into adulthood. It's fascinating and sometimes painful to realize that the fears and strategies children develop to secure connection don't simply disappear. They evolve. In adult relationships, anxious attachment often manifests as a constant need for reassurance, heightened sensitivity to perceived rejection, and a deep fear of abandonment. I often hear people describe the roller coaster of emotions in romantic relationships. Moments of intense closeness followed by anxiety when their partner seems distant. These patterns mirror exactly what Ainsworth observed in the strange situation. Adults with anxious attachment may text excessively, overanalyze small changes in tone or behavior, or feel threatened by even minor separations. There's a longing for connection paired with an underlying mistrust, an echo of childhood experiences when love and attention felt inconsistent. What strikes me is how internalized these patterns become. Many anxious adults aren't consciously aware that their reactions are rooted in early attachment experiences. They feel too sensitive or too needy, often judging themselves harshly for wanting closeness. Yet when we view these behaviors through the lens of Ainsworth's research, we can see them differently. As adaptive strategies developed in childhood to cope with unpredictability in caregivers' responses. Understanding this doesn't erase the discomfort, but it reframes it, transforming self-criticism into curiosity and compassion. I find it powerful to pause and observe our reactions in relationships, asking, where is this anxiety coming from? Is it about the present moment, or is it a reflection of patterns learned long ago? By connecting the dots between childhood attachment and adult relational dynamics, we begin to recognize triggers and patterns, rather than being unconsciously driven by them. For example, noticing a sudden wave of insecurity when a partner doesn't immediately reply to a message is a moment of awareness, a chance to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Another insight I've gained is the role of communication in mitigating anxious attachment. Adults with this attachment style often fear that expressing their needs will push others away, yet open and honest communication can reduce anxiety dramatically. The key is self-awareness, recognizing that the fear of abandonment is a signal, not a command, and learning to articulate needs calmly, without guilt or shame. As I explore these reflections, I realize that anxious attachment is not a flaw to be fixed, but a part of the human experience that calls for understanding and care. By connecting childhood experiences with adult relationships, we gain tools to navigate intimacy with more awareness, empathy, and resilience. As I reflect on anxious attachment, one thing becomes clear: awareness is the first step toward transformation. Observing these patterns in the strange situation and seeing how they echo in adult relationships gives us a framework, but the real challenge and opportunity lies in applying this understanding in daily life. How do we honor our need for connection without being consumed by fear of rejection or abandonment? One strategy I've found incredibly helpful is mindful self-reflection. When anxiety arises in relationships, I pause and ask myself, is this fear about the present moment, or is it a memory from the past playing itself out now? This simple practice allows me to separate past experiences from current reality. It's like stepping back from the storm, noticing the waves without being swept away. Over time, this cultivates a sense of inner stability that helps regulate intense emotional reactions. Another approach is communicating needs openly and calmly. For anxious individuals, expressing vulnerability can feel risky, as if showing our neediness will push others away. Yet, when we communicate honestly about our feelings, we often discover that partners, friends, and colleagues respond with empathy rather than judgment. I've noticed that framing requests as personal reflections rather than demands, such as "I feel anxious when I don't hear from you" instead of "you're ignoring me," can transform anxiety into connection. Self-soothing techniques are equally vital. Engaging in activities that foster a sense of safety and calm, deep breathing, journaling, or even listening to calming music, helps regulate the nervous system. I often remind myself that I can provide comfort to myself, even when someone else isn't immediately available. This doesn't replace connection with others, but it creates a foundation of emotional resilience that allows me to engage more authentically. Therapeutic support can also be transformative. Working with a therapist who understands attachment theory provides a safe space to explore patterns, triggers, and emotional responses. Through therapy, many anxious individuals learn to identify their internalized fears and practice new ways of relating to others. I've observed that even small shifts in awareness and behavior, like pausing before reacting to perceived rejection, can create ripple effects in relationships, reducing anxiety and fostering trust. Recognizing that these thoughts are echoes of past experiences allows me to replace judgment with kindness. Saying to myself, "It's okay to want closeness. It's a natural part of being human," helps soothe the mind and recalibrate emotional responses. As I practice these strategies, I see anxious attachment not as a limitation but as a guide, a signal pointing toward areas where deeper connection, self-awareness, and emotional regulation are possible. In the next and final part, I want to explore the broader reflection on the journey of understanding anxious attachment, tying together insights from childhood, adult relationships, and personal growth. As I bring together these reflections on anxious attachment, I realize that the journey is not about fixing ourselves or erasing our patterns. Instead, it's about understanding, accepting, and learning to navigate the complexities of our emotional world with curiosity and compassion. Observing children in the strange situation, particularly those with anxious ambivalent attachment, offers a mirror that reflects our own relational fears, desires, and vulnerabilities. One insight that strikes me deeply is how early experiences shape our expectations of love and connection. Anxious attachment is often rooted in unpredictability, a caregiver who sometimes responds warmly and other times withdraws. This inconsistency teaches children to remain hyper-aware, scanning for cues of rejection or abandonment. As adults, these early lessons manifest in subtle and overt ways. A pang of jealousy, a racing heart when a partner is quiet, or a compulsion to seek reassurance. Recognizing these patterns is not about blame. It's about tracing the thread of experience and understanding how it has woven itself into our emotional fabric. Reflecting on my own life, I see moments where anxious tendencies guided my behavior, sometimes leading to tension, other times to growth. The key, I've learned, is awareness paired with action. Awareness allows me to pause before reacting, to consider whether my anxiety is grounded in the present or echoing from the past. Action involves using tools like mindful reflection, honest communication, and self-soothing to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Over time, this creates a more balanced approach to intimacy, one that honors both my needs and the needs of others. Another profound realization is the power of self-compassion. Anxious attachment often comes with harsh internal judgment. I'm too much. I'm unworthy of love. Yet, when I recognize these thoughts as echoes of past experiences rather than truths, I can respond with kindness. I remind myself, wanting connection is human, vulnerability is strength, and emotional sensitivity is a gift. This shift in perspective doesn't eliminate anxiety, but it transforms the relationship I have with it. Anxiety becomes a teacher rather than a tyrant. Finally, the strange situation reminds me that relationships are dynamic, not static. Just as children adapt to caregivers, we can learn new ways of relating, building trust and security over time. Anxious attachment is not destiny. It is a starting point for self-discovery, emotional growth, and deeper connection. By observing, reflecting, and practicing strategies to regulate our emotions, we create the possibility for healthier, more fulfilling relationships, with others and with ourselves. As I conclude this reflection, I invite you to consider your own experiences with attachment. Notice the echoes from childhood, observe the patterns in your adult life, and approach your emotional world with curiosity rather than judgment. The journey of understanding anxious attachment is ongoing, layered, and deeply human, but it is also full of potential for insight, connection, and profound personal growth.